I want to quickly touch on an absolutely crazy story that's getting less coverage than I would have expected. But I think this could end up, I hope it will, really backfiring on Republicans, could really destroy them electorally because of how unpopular it is. Take a look at this reporting from the Washington Post first. Prominent congressional Republicans are coming out in support, and this part's not the bad part, but we'll get to it, of in vitro fertilization days after the Alabama State Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are people and therefore that someone can be held liable for destroying them. But many of the same Republicans, here it is, who are saying Americans should have access to IVF have co-sponsored legislation that employs an argument similar to the one the Alabama Supreme Court used in its ruling. The congressional proposal, known as the Life at Conception Act, defines a human being to, quote, include each member of the species Homo sapiens at all stages of life, including the moment of fertilization or cloning or other moment at which an individual member of the human species comes into being. The bill would also provide equal protection under the 14th Amendment for the right to life of each born and pre-born human person. So House Republicans, for some reason, are pushing forward legislation signed on to by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson that would do the very thing that many of them right now are panicking about and saying they don't want to support in the wake of the Alabama Supreme Court ruling, which is opening up IVF centers to way too much liability and would crush IVF for families trying to have children. The pro-family values party, ladies and gentlemen. Then here's MSNBC's Chris Hayes. For the second time today, I'm referencing him, expanding on this.
Things are even worse on the House side. You saw a whole bunch of House members talking about how much they love IVF. A majority of the Republican caucus has signed onto a bill that would nationalize the Alabama ruling. I'm not making this up. It includes Speaker Mike Johnson, who claimed to support IVF in a recent statement. Here's the bill. You can find it online, okay? H.R. 431. The bill is called the Life at Conception Act. It would, and I'm quoting the bill language, implement equal protection under the 14th Article of the Amendment to the Constitution for the right to life of each born and preborn human person. Well, how do you define that? It goes on to define a human person as including, and I quote again, each and every member of the species Homo sapiens at all stages of life, and here's the key part, including the moment of fertilization. Frozen embryos have been fertilized, so 14th Amendment rights, right? A similar bill in the Senate, we should note, has very similar language, but it also explicitly carves out IVF. Guess what? The House version makes no such exception. You think that's an oversight? I think it's intentional. I think House Republicans know exactly what they're doing, that it is both craven and extremely unpopular.
So obviously the policy of this is crazy. Defining personhood as at conception or fertilization is horrible in all of its implications that I know I don't have to explain to you, stripping away the rights of women. But as I often say on these things, you have the policy, but also the politics. And while I obviously don't understand the policy, I also really don't understand the politics in an election year. Why on earth, Republicans, are you making your very unpopular stance on reproductive rights even more in people's faces? If Republicans lose big in November, as I'm expecting and hoping that they will, one of the major variables will be reproductive rights. This coming in the form of abortion rights for much of the last few years, but now IVF becoming a big issue because of Alabama's ruling. Why on earth are you doing everything you can as a party to alienate as many voters as possible? I really don't understand, but I guess make your beliefs known so that we can crush you electorally. Now, by the way, if you take this sort of definition to its logical conclusion, things get pretty wacky, as our resident legal expert pointed out in a past segment when we covered this ruling. Of course, Aaron Parnas said this.
Yeah, I mean, so now apparently if fertilized embryos are considered humans, then anyone can go and fertilize, say, 20 embryos and now have 20 tax deductions on their tax forms. They now have 20 extra COVID relief checks, $2,000 a pop. They now have a number, they now can claim that an embryo is a passenger and go in a HOV lane on a highway. There are just so many different implications. This really does open up Pandora's box in a lot of ways. Now, if you're watching this video and you're in Alabama, no, you can't do any of these things because this was a limited ruling simply related to the wrongful death statute. But you could totally see conservatives expanding this definition to include embryos in a number of scenarios, and it's a major issue that will, like I said, open up Pandora's box.
Yeah, so even though obviously, I think obviously, those sorts of things wouldn't be allowed to happen, it emphasizes the ridiculousness of what we're talking about here. Now, this next clip was too good to just play once, so I'm going to play it again to remind you of how much Republicans are struggling to answer for this Alabama ruling. I'll show you Tommy Tuberville being confronted about it, and starting off by saying he supports the Alabama Supreme Court decision, then just minutes or, seconds later saying he doesn't support it and needs to read it. Take a look.
Sasha Burns with NBC News. I wanted to ask, do you have a reaction to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on the fact that embryos are children?
Yeah, I was all for it. You just got to look at everything going on in the country. It's just an attack on families, attack on kids. Anything that we can do for the future of our young people, because they're our number one commodity. We need to have more kids. We need to have an opportunity to do that. And I thought this was the right thing to do. But
IVF is used to have more children, and right now IVF services are paused at some of the clinics in Alabama. Aren't you concerned that this could impact people who are trying to have kids?
Well, that's for another conversation. I think the big thing is right now you go back to the situation and try to work it out to where it's best for everybody. I mean, that's what the whole abortion issue is about. So
but this really isn't about abortion. It's about IVF and the concern that now families might not have access to it.
But it's about the same direction. But I agree. But people need to have access. People need to have. We need more kids. We need the people to have the opportunity to have kids.
IVF is not a Democrat or Republican issue. Families across the board use it. What is your message to the Supreme Court if this does in fact stop families from being able to use IVF?
Well, we don't need that. I'm understanding with that. We need people to have an opportunity to have kids. Okay, that's my whole.
You support women being able to have IVF?
Sure I do. I understand that. I mean, that's not my decision.
But do you agree with that decision?
No, they should be able to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
They
should be able
to have IVF treatment.
Sure they should.
Do you agree with the Supreme Court decision or not?
I'd have to look at what they're agreeing to or not agreeing to. I haven't seen that.
They've
Okay.
decided that.
And as I said when we covered this previously, Tommy Tuberville has so little respect for his constituents that he didn't even bother to read up on the case. It's pretty disgusting. And Mike Johnson came out in favor of IVF very proudly, even though he's supporting this legislation. They're confused but dishonest and advocating for truly bad policy positions. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, and that is super helpful. If you want to go a step further and get a daily bonus show, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership.